The success criteria is under the principle perceivable and the guideline adaptable. So this is the first success criteria under that. 1.3.1 info and relationships requires that information, structure, and relationships that are presented visually, they also need to be available programmatically to assistive devices. So what does this actually mean? Now, when you look at any website or any digital content, you realize that visually there are so many relationships between the content. The content is structured a certain way. Like here, you can see all of this is your menu is structured in a certain way. You have your content in these panels, in these separate panels. You have your headings here. Now you can see that benefits has been highlighted in some way visually. You also see that content has been put into separate panels to identify them as a single unit. You can notice that some of these are collapsible. They can be opened and then you get more information. And you notice that headings have been used a certain way. Just that the information and content is organized in a very different way and represents, when you look at it visually, you immediately understand that these are the relationships. This is the relationship between the data here. This is what is the information that we get from this data. So visually, you can see all of that. But this, when you use a assistive device like a screen reader, all of this information, like the colors, the style changes in the text, you're blind to all of this, right? You can't really see all of that. But that information, it needs to be conveyed to the assistive technology device. And this is done programmatically by adding labels, by using like semantic code structures, by using ARIA wherever it's required, by basically informing and creating instructions in the right way, informing the accessibility device about all of this information and creating what we call an accessibility tree that's complete. Again, the way to test this is, first of all, to do a manual scan, go through and see if there is anything visually that needs to be programmatically represented. You would also run an automated run because that's the simplest way to find these kind of issues, is to run an automated run. So we will do that here. For example, I'm going to be using the manulife.ca personal.html. And let's run a an automated run using Axe DevTools. Before that, I would like to just kind of maybe use Wave and see what we find, and then we will use Axe DevTools and see further what we can find. So let's just wave this first. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, that's my wave tool. And okay, and I can see that there is a lot of ARIA labels that have been used on this page, which is a good thing. It gives information to the screen readers clearly. For example, here now, when you look at this, the relationship is visible very clearly to a person with sight, right? So a sighted user can see that learn more is related to this information above. So learn more about a healthier heart, right? So when you have substituted it with an ARIA label here, you have given the programmatic information that is required to the assistive device. And so the assistive device understands this as learn more about what we are doing to keep you healthy. So this is really clear, right? So you have explained the relationship really clearly here. And that's what is required for 1.3.1 info and relationships. So you see that there are labels very beautifully put in throughout. the website. The learn more buttons are not just learn more buttons. It says learn more about how menopause affects heart health. So this is about that, the article about this. Learn more about a better understanding and strong financial decisions. So it's very clear to the assistive technology user that this is what is being said here. So programmatically, you find that the ARIA labels are in place, and they're very clear, right? Okay. So we find those kind of errors. There aren't any errors. There are contrast issues, but that's different. We can deal with that later. We will also now try to run this with Axe DevTools and see what happens. Okay, so I have my Axe DevTools open here on the left side, and I'm going to do a full page scan on this page, and let's see what we find. Okay, not bad. We just have one issue, and they are calling it a critical issue. I'm surprised why this hasn't been resolved if it's a critical issue and it's out here, but that's what we are seeing. So let's see what this issue is about, right? We go here and it says ARIA attributes must conform to valid values. So yes, that's one very important aspect, that when you create and use ARIA, you must use valid values in there. You can't just put whatever you want in there, right? So that creates confusion. It's better not to use ARIA if you're not confident about it. Just stay with HTML. The first way is to first have semantic HTML. All your HTML, which is semantic, has the intrinsic ability to convey information to the screen readers. Now, ARIA is used as an additional substitution in case your HTML is not enough for certain things, like you have custom components, for example, like tab panels, for example. That's what we're looking at here, I think. Or we're looking at, we'll come to that. But all of this, that's the only time when you would start adding ARIA. ARIA labels for this learn more, which has an intrinsic label, but it's not enough. So there is an ARIA label added to it, like we saw, right? So that happens only when you need to add more information, supplemental more information, which is not possible with just basic native HTML. Always remember that. No ARIA sometimes is better than bad ARIA. So always actually is better than bad ARIA. So we have this issue here, which says ensure all ARIA attributes have valid values. Okay, so let's locate this. So what are we talking about? I'm going to highlight it. So we are talking about this button here. And this is a part of this carousel or slideshow, I would think, yes. So this is a slideshow button, which is active. Now this has been coded as a list, which is given a role of a tab. So it has the a role of a tab with sub-tab panel, I'm thinking that will be, yeah, so it controls the hero carousel item 0. So this is what it controls. Okay. Let's look at this. Let's open this in, let's dock it like this so we can see that information more clearly. What I will do is I will simply inspect this. Let's inspect just that and see the code more clearly. Okay, so that's our code. Now it uses a role of tab, ARIA controls. Okay, so it's controlling this element. It has an ARIA label of slide 1. Okay. ARIA selected true, tab index 0, which means that it's the active tab, which is correct. So they have used this as a tab, which all of these look okay to me. All of the attributes used are okay, but then why do we have that error, right? Now, I think the data is being filled in dynamically somehow. And if you see this, the ARIA controls hero carousel, this number, item, and they have given it a value of 0. So this does not exist anywhere. Okay, this actually does not exist in reality. So they would substitute this with this number that's coming up here. So you can see that, right? I think that's how it's coded. And so that's why we have this issue that the ARIA controls a ID or a div that does not exist. So that's why we have this issue that's come up. The code is valid. The code is valid. It's not invalid, ARIA controls. But it's just because of the dynamic nature of this component that they have created. They have given it a item of 0, and this does not exist anywhere. You won't. It just does not exist anywhere. Because if you see, all the IDs have a number. Where is this ID with 0, right? So maybe the solution could be they could have a hidden element which has a value of 0 on this screen, which is not visible either on the screen or in or to the assistive device. But since it is still present in your code, it will be a part of your DOM. So if it's a part of the DOM, then it gets picked up and you won't get this issue. So really these are the kind of things that you look for or when you're checking for information and the relationships and how it's conveyed to the screen reader user. Okay, here's another example of how semantic code has been used inappropriately. You see, this is where the ULs and the LIs, so your lists, have been used as spacers for a grid with content, right? They have been used to space out elements. And for some reason, these have been made into lists within this grid. And these are not lists, right? Like if you look at this code, and I'm going to inspect this. Okay, so that's an H1P. Okay, so you see this has been made into a list here. This is another element of the list. This is a third element of the list. And why should this be a list? So lists have been used for layout, while these are not really lists. So that's an issue. So this is one issue that might, that is not caught with your automated runs, but it is an issue when you look at it this way, right? Another example of information being not conveyed clearly is they have these sign-in buttons here. Okay, so when I inspect this, my sign-in is not conveyed clearly because it just has a sign-in, and the sign-in, when visually I look at this, I know that this sign-in is for members. I know that this sign-in is for sponsors. I know that this sign-in is for advisors. But this information has not been coded programmatically to convey that this is a sign-in for members, sign-in for sponsors, or sign-in for advisors. Every time it just says sign in, and sign in, right? You can check these pages with screen readers, and that's the best way actually to find out if any of the code and the information on the websites have been represented correctly to the screen readers. So for 1.3.1, you do an automated run, yes, but you also check the entire website with a screen reader, which is very important. Now I'm going to quickly run through this example with a screen reader. I'm using VoiceOver, and let's see how these sign in buttons are announced. They should essentially say members sign in, sponsors sign in, or advisors sign in. Let's see what they say, okay?
Keyboard focus. Link, sign in. Link, sign in. Link, sign in. Visited, link, sign in.
So you see that all of them just say link sign in, and sign in. Nothing says members sign in or sponsors sign in or advisors sign in, right? Let's see what the next, let's just go forward tabbing and see how these are all announced. Then we know the relationship and if the relationship is being announced correctly or not.
Link, sign in, link, sign in, link. Get help with your Manulife ID. Get link, explore plans, list 3 items.
And it's confusing because it says explore plans and list 3 items. Now, because these have been used as lists within a list for display or for formatting and not actually are not actually lists, it is confusing when it's announced as link, explore plans, list 3 items. So here the relationship of the data is very confusing to the screen reader user because they're not really able to see it. They think there is a list here, right?
Link, browse articles.
This a list is used generally with a navigation system. So I don't know if they're assuming this is a navigation system and that's why they're using it that way, but it is not really navigation. I mean, you need to reach these links directly without it belonging to a navigation system, really. So I'm a little confused with the coding here, but yeah.
Link, check out the financial wellness assessment. Link, browse articles.
Again, browse articles could have been a little more explanatory. What kind of articles are we going to look at? But this is still acceptable.
Link, check out the financial wellness assessment. Visited, link, learn more about how to get started. Link, find out about saving regularly. Link, read about changing life stages. Link, explore information about retirement. Link, explore tools and calculators. Link, get started.
Okay, just get started. Now, if I'm looking at it, I know I'm reading the context. It says join your plan. Welcome to your Manulife Group Retirement Program. Get ready to experience all your plan has to offer. And then I have this button that says get started, right? So for me, visually, it makes sense because the context is there. But if I can't see it and I'm going through it, just get started means what? Get started with what? That's my question, right? So they can have an ARIA label added to this, which will clearly tell you what is the additional information. So you can say, get started to experience all your plan has to offer. Or get started and join your plan or something, right? Something that is clear.
Link, sign in, list 2 items.
See, again, it says sign in and it says list 2 items.
Link, check out the app, main.
So check out the app. It could say, check out the Manulife mobile app. And that's so clear, right? Again, this is not very clear. Check out the app.
Link, find an advisor, group.
So the reason why we need these to be clear is because when you browse with a screen reader, sometimes you go to this thing called the rotor, especially with VoiceOver, right? So if I open the rotor, I think it's, let me remember.
Links menu.
Yeah. So this, I have a links menu, right, in my rotor. My rotor can
Headings
pick up
menu.
Headings, can pick up
Form controls menu.
Yeah, form controls.
Headings menu. Links menu.
So I have a links menu, and my links menu will have all of these labels listed so that people with the assistive device can go through quickly by understanding just the links, what you're doing. So if my sign-ins were clear, I would know what I would be signing into, and I can click straight from here and go to that sign-in page if I need to. If the point about the app was very clear, right? If it said something really clear for, instead of just explore the app, if it said something about Manulife mobile app, it made
Find and
more
check out the
sense.
sign in, get started, explore tools and calculators. Get started.
See, as a standalone, again, get started says nothing to me, right? So this is what 1.3.1 requires, that we be able to convey what the visual experience and context is to the assistive devices through clear text that are programmatically added to the web page. Okay, there's another interesting thing that we need to keep in mind, that the content between what is represented visually and what will be conveyed to the screen reader. There needs to be this interesting balance. So visually also, I shouldn't have redundant information, right? So I'm saying getting started, at work and life, and then again I'm saying learn more about how to get started. So here I have getting started, here again I'm saying the same thing. So that's kind of redundant for people with sight. Yeah, I know the reaction would be more like, yeah, I know you're talking about getting started, right? So what can you do about that? I mean, it's like a double-edged sword. If this is explicitly written out again, it becomes redundant information for people with sight. But if it's not written out clearly, then it is not enough information for people without sight. So how do you balance that? That's where things like your audio labels come in, right? So when you just have learn more, if I were to do this, I would just keep this button as learn more, and then I would supplement this entire text in my audio label just for screen readers. So that's how you would code this, because this right now is an issue for people with it's not really an issue, but it is redundant information, right? So it would be flagged as too much of information or repeated information, right, on the visual sense. So this is something that can be simpler. Like, for example, if you look at this, I would leave this visually like that. Welcome to, like, join your plan, welcome to the Manulife Group Retirement Program, get started to experience all your plan has to offer. And then they have a visual button which says get started. But I will supplement this button with an ARIA label. And within the ARIA label, that's where I would put the detailed text of saying get started to get started to join your plan, or get started to experience all your plan has to offer, right? So that's something that we need to keep in mind as well. Another good example of related information is where you have, say, this is a contact page, and you have these individual, let me call them cards, for each of the contact offices, and just each of the sections within the contact information. This is a very good visual presentation. It keeps your eye from getting confused. People with low vision can easily tell these are groups of data and these are related to one another, right? So the important part about how this needs to be conveyed to the screen reader is your tab order and your reading order, right? So this has to be read out as a unit, and only after that's done should it move to the next one. It has to be read out after that, and then it comes down to the next row. So that's very important, how your units of information or related information is conveyed to the screen reader. So for this success criteria 1.3.1 info and relationships, what you see visually, the relationships of data that you see visually has to be the way that the information is conveyed to an assistive device. Another example of visual representation and how it is conveyed to the screen readers. If you see over here, we have this little icon visually, which tells you that this clicking on this will take you to a new instance of a browser, or to take you outside of this page, right? Also, you have this X over here, which says that this menu can be closed when you click on this. And so this is a submenu, and this information needs to be conveyed as it's represented here to the screen reader. And this has to be coded. This icon can have an ARIA label which says, or which tells you that group benefits overview, say read on new page, or something like that, to that effect, right? So let's just quickly see if something's been done about this. It has an ARIA label that says opens in a new tab, which is excellent, right? So that's one way of programmatically conveying information that we are seeing on the screen. And this would have a close ARIA label which says close when you inspect that, and that should be there. So it says ARIA label close navigation on the button. So this is what we're talking about. Okay, I'm going to stop right here because I can keep going on and finding new content that talks about info and relationships, but you get the idea of it. Thank you so much.